Welcome to Resourced and Resourceful Leadership, a podcast for people who care about the world and their impact in it. I'm Dr. Christine Pettit, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Thank you. Today, I bring you a conversation with Katherine Golub. For over 13 years, Katherine has been coaching activists, organizers, and community leaders to transform conflict, heal burnout, and cultivate the clarity and confidence required to rise to the challenges of our times in ways that make them proud. Katherine is also a community organizer with over 25 years of experience, the host of the Conflict Decoded podcast, the mother of her 18-year-old son, an avid Latin dancer, and a city councilor in Greenfield, Massachusetts, on the unceded ancestral lands of the Pocomtuck people. I stumbled upon Katherine first through her podcast. I love learning through podcasts, and I wanted to hear Deepa Iyer, who articulated the social change ecosystem, talk more about the ecosystem and her work. So I looked her up on my podcast app and found that Katherine had interviewed her on her podcast, Conflict Decoded. As Katherine and I connected more, I could see so many overlaps in our lives and work, and many points of departure too, so I knew this would be an interesting conversation. And I just listened to it back a few times through the editing process, and it is an interesting and thought-provoking conversation, if I do say so myself. So I'm excited for you to hear it. Let's get to it. Thank you for joining me, Katherine.
Thank you for having me.
Of
Yeah, I'm really
course.
looking forward to it.
Awesome. Me too. Well, I know that you have a really interesting background. I want to get into that, but I also just wanted to start out with talking a little bit about how I found you and the work that you do. So, how we found each other really,
Yeah.
because you actually made the first, like, I requested you on LinkedIn and then you were like, "Oh, we have some similarities in our
Yeah.
backgrounds." And yeah, so I appreciate that. But I actually found you because I was looking up a podcast with someone that I was interested in learning more about, and you interviewed her. And then I was like, wow, there's just, I really appreciate your podcast. I listen regularly. And I know you do a lot of work helping activists, organizers, and community leaders around conflict. And I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I love to share about my work. So, I primarily work with individuals who come to me at a moment of burnout and a lot of confusion about what's next in their work. So, my clients, like you said, are folks who are working really hard for social justice um, and work really hard. And because of the amount that they work and because of dynamics in their workplaces, they burn out. They're wondering about what's next. And a lot of my clients come to me pretty convinced that they need to pursue something else. But through our work together, about half of my clients end up falling back in love with the work that they do. And about half of them leave feeling really confident and proud of having taken all the steps that are within their power to shift the dynamics at their workplaces. And while most people, I think about burnout as stemming from overworking, what I've found over the years is that perhaps even more often, burnout stems from challenging interpersonal dynamics or people dynamics in people's workplaces. And so I have come to focus more and more on transforming conflict in the workplace as part of my work, although I primarily still do it through coaching individuals.
That's awesome. It's so important. And to support people at that moment, especially folks in social justice, organizing, to support them in that moment to lead, I imagine, in alignment with their values and to figure out a way to approach the situation when it might feel hopeless at first.
Yeah, and when you say alignment with values, there are often really challenging choices that people need to make in order to realign with their values, or also in order to reprioritize which values are going to center. So I define core values as priority needs, actually. And I use a definition of needs that comes from the nonviolent communication lineage. And I'd be happy to link to a non-comprehensive list of needs that I have created over the years in show notes in case that's helpful for listeners. Oftentimes, like we have so many needs, and it's impossible to center all of them at the same time. And often my clients have been really centering needs around collective care. And that's important. And sometimes people say, oh, I just need to learn to prioritize myself. And I would say that's not entirely true. There's a polarity between collective care and individual care or self care. And in order to be fully whole and to be fully in line with our purpose of supporting and being part of a collective, we have to hold both. Often my clients need to bring in a bit of that individual care to complement, to hold the other side of the collective care in order to feed their own energy, and actually also in order to not show up from a place of resentment or irritation, annoyance, anger, but to feel grounded in themselves and like whole individuals who can act much more effectively as part of the whole.
Absolutely. Well, you do a lot of individual work. Do you also do group work? I believe you have a kind of container of folks who work together.
Yeah. Yeah. So I work with individuals one on one, and I also have a program that I call the Changemakers Mentorship. And that's a really small, very intimate cohort of four people. Most of the time, people don't know each other from before, although occasionally I have cohorts that altogether sign up again. They've done 6 months and they want to continue. They've formed those relationships and those bonds and they want to continue another 6 months or into the future together. So they're individuals who typically don't know each other yet, but who all of my clients come with the similar challenges. And so the resonance that is created, that feel resonance is that you say something to me and I say something back to you that reflects that I understand you, and you say, yeah, you get me. That's that moment of resonance, which is key to healing and preventing trauma. And so the resonance I can offer and do a lot of resonance to my clients. They receive that from me. But watching other people nod and smile along and really see that other people get you, that's a really healing component of these cohorts that I create that I can't offer on my own. And yeah, I love that group work.
Yeah, that's so important. It's something when I coach leaders on, it's like finding your peers, finding people who understand your experience. Might not be exactly the same, but who relate or
Yeah.
resonate, as you're saying. And that's so important to building our ability to, feel seen, heard, and also just to navigate these situations with support.
Yeah. Yeah. And so often we get stuck in conflict because we don't receive that resonance, or also we don't offer that resonance to one another. And when tension is heightened with people, especially typically in organizations, there's some type of power dynamic, it can be really hard to receive or offer that resonance to the people that we're in conflict with. And so receiving it in a safe enough space outside of that dynamic can help us return to that dynamic feeling held enough to show up in ways that we want to show up and that are more effective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's really cool. So I'm curious. I mean, you touched on it a bit, but maybe for those who are listening, like, what's the benefit of the one-on-one work and what's the benefit of the group work?
Yeah, well, it's very similar. And, to be honest, The private work is you get more time. People get more time with me. Um, the most of my clients, I work with them twice a month. And, at the first month, it's 2 2-hour sessions, and the other months, it's 2 1-hour sessions. With the 4-person cohort, we also meet twice a month for an hour and 45 minutes. And two people, we start with sharing news and goods. And then I lead a centering practice. And then two people get coaching. And after each person gets coaching, someone else shares a gift that they received from the person who is receiving coaching. And then we check out with something that people are taking away and something people are committed to doing. So the people who are in the group don't get all that. They get about half an hour of coaching personally once a month. And so if someone's starting in more of a crisis place and they can afford private coaching, sometimes I encourage private coaching and then group coaching in the future. But a lot of people can't afford private coaching. And so I have a solidarity pricing scale for both my private coaching and my group coaching. Um, and it's hard, right? It's hard to reconcile needing to be paid as a practitioner and making this work sustainable and wanting to make the work accessible. So financially, the group is more accessible to folks. Also, I'll say with the private coaching, we start with a much more in-depth by creating a much more in-depth container. So I'll start clients the really in-depth process of forming like specifically articulated competency-based outcomes. I think like if I ever teach coaches or therapists or whatever, it'd be like one of the things I would teach is competency-focused work. And I could share examples, but like, being able to notice and being able to embody a compassionate witness perspective, or being able to notice and name the different parts of ourselves that are active when we feel inner conflict and noticing what they each need. Or there's competencies around writing to-do lists and monthly-ish goals and weekly reviews that I help a lot of clients with, etc., or different ways of communicating. But in the first month of working with people privately, we create competency-based outcomes, a clear next horizon vision statement, clear values, and a commitment statement that's like an anchor to the quick link to the heart of what we're working on. So this is all in a Google document. And so it's a much more thorough container that I'm also setting up with folks
Mm-hmm.
individually. But they miss out on being able to just sit back and witness people being coached on challenges that they have and learning in that way. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, both are really powerful, and it sounds like you do set a really intentional container with people at the beginning. And I imagine to some extent, that happens also in the group work that you do, but not
Mhm.
nearly as in depth. And that's very,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, I've benefited from both the individual and the group. And I think, yeah, at different times they can be helpful and for different things. But it is both, I think, are very worthwhile at different
Mhm.
points. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Often a client will start like doing a month when it's within their ability to afford a month of private coaching and then the 6 month change makers mentorship. That's a great way to incorporate both.
hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I know I shared with you, I think when we connected on LinkedIn, like, oh my gosh, I really would have benefited from that when I was active in the work, especially as a union organizer and leader. And I left that work very burnt out. And I still continue to be connected to and, was involved in leadership around social justice in my community. And, I have an affinity for coaching folks in those spaces as well. But it was just not accessible to me or that I was aware of at that time. So it's so important that you're making this available to people too.
Yeah, I love it. I've been doing it like 13 and a half years. I feel like a kid when it's like there's something celebratory of like, look how old I am. But I've been doing it a long time and I love it. Like I feel so grateful to get to do work that I love so much and that
Hmm.
really nourishes me.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, how did you come to this work?
Almost all of my early work, except for being a waitress at Friendly's, almost all of my early work, like in college, was related to organizing. And after college, I worked with Unite Here, the Hotel Workers Union, for a few years in New Haven and Providence, and then in Tucson and Phoenix. And then when I was 25, I went to a routine doctor's visit and there discovered that I was pregnant.
Mm.
And my partner at that time had just been deported. So I had moved from New Haven to Phoenix. This is in 2006 to continue working with the union. He was deported. He was racially profiled while driving to work and was deported back to Mexico. So I'd moved to Arizona to be closer to Mexico. And I discovered I was pregnant. And so I couldn't continue my work with the union because I couldn't stay in the United States and have my son be with his father. So I moved to Oaxaca, Mexico, and I was 7 months pregnant. And then I was like, what do I do now? And at that time, I decided that I wanted to support other new parents on the rite of passage to a birth and parenting. So I became a birth doula and a childbirth educator and a yoga teacher, pre and postnatal yoga teacher. And I finally moved back to the States when my son was 4. It took us 6 years to get his dad's visa.
Mm.
But I was basically a co-parenting, but basically the primary single parent of a 4-year-old. And so I couldn't work on call as a doula, and I didn't want to rely on nighttime or weekend teaching of birth classes or yoga classes. So I was like, what's the closest to that? I loved supporting people through big life transitions, and so I became a coach. And
Mm.
yeah, that's so my son just turned 18. He's going to college in August, and
Wow.
I've been coaching since he was about 4 years old.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations
Thanks.
on all of the things. It is like becoming a parent under those circumstances in particular, and then, just figuring it out. Like, okay, how do I make this work?
Mhm.
Then pivoting to coaching, supporting your son as he's going off to college. That's all so awesome. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it brought me up. All those experiences grew me up very quickly at a young age, and yeah, I feel prepared me. There were a lot of decisions back then and a lot of challenging moments to go through, and I feel like it prepared me for the work that I get to do
Mhm.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you even know that coaching was a pathway that you could take?
I just heard about it and I initially signed up for a health coaching training because I was like, okay, I'm supporting people around health related things, yoga, etc. But very quickly I realized that I people were coming to me around support with work related challenges and also relationship related challenges. Often clients will come to me for work related things, and then I will also end up supporting them around their more intimate partnerships or their parenting. So I quickly discovered that people were, yeah, asking me for support with those things. And I was able to source from really a lot of my doula work and my birthing from within training. And I had done an apprenticeship in the four agreements back then. And then I've been training ever since. I'm a training junkie. I'm
Mhm.
always doing some type of training. But yeah, I just like I heard about coaching and I was like, okay, I'll do that. And here I am.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I can really relate to the training junkie piece and also
Mhm.
just the like pulling of tools and you're like, I'm gonna learn for myself, and this is also helpful for others too.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned the four agreements, and then I know systemic constellations is something that you
Mm.
work with.
Mhm.
Oh, and you mentioned nonviolent communication too. So it sounds like those are some of the tools that you bring in.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember being at a systemic constellations training like 7 years ago, and one of the people in my training was like, it's like Each of these methodologies is like an app. It's not like they're the complete operating system, but they're like a necessary app in the system. So there's, nonviolent communication, excuse me, nonviolent communication, parts work. A lot of people are like, oh, do you do internal family systems? And I don't do internal family systems, but it's the work that I do is very, very similar. Um, there's focusing, which is Eugene Genlin's work around turning toward and being with sensations and emotions in the body. And then there's systemic constellations, and there's Sarah Payton's resonance work. There's always like, okay, what's the next piece? Although I do feel like I may soon stop being a training junkie. Like I think I'm going to the Netherlands for an organizational constellations training on Saturday. It's something I've wanted to do for the last 6 years, and this is part two in the three-part training there. So maybe after September, I don't know what the I feel kind of complete, but I enjoy learning so much that I'm skeptical of that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You sound a lot like me, where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pause, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna pause until this one opens up again. So I,
Mhm.
I am doing an IFS training for coaches coming up. It starts later this week, actually.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, I try to pace myself,
Yeah.
but it's like and it's not, I mean, I work with clients on this too. You don't need all of these like certifications
No.
and qualifications. Like you have a lot of experience and knowledge to give already. I don't think I am coming from that place, at least not anymore. It's just like I just like to learn and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Mhm.
it's people have said, "Oh, you should stop doing it." I'm like, "No, but I feel called to. Like it brings me so much joy. Like I love doing it." So, and I'm able to.
Mhm.
The folks in the Netherlands gave me a huge scholarship. I was like, I do this work with organizers
Amazing.
in the States, and they're like, "We want you to." I'm the only American in this training.
That's awesome.
Actually, there's someone from Uruguay, so she is also American. So I should qualify that statement. I'm the only person from the United States. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, I do it because it brings me a lot of delight. Learning is one of my core values. So,
Yeah,
yeah. Mhm.
that's great. Well, I don't know a ton about systemic constellations, and I imagine some folks listening don't as well. Can you share a bit about that work?
Yeah, sure. So, systemic constellations is a methodology that was initially developed by a man named Bert Hellinger, who was in his early life a Jesuit priest with the Zulu people in South Africa. And so he learned a lot from them, and that there's roots of this work there. And then he continued to take the work over the next few decades and bring in, I think he was kind of a training junkie too, brought in many different methodologies and developed this work that was initially just known as family constellations. And it is a way to um, shine light on hidden dynamics that are keeping us stuck, that are hidden dynamics that are systemic. So initially, it was really just focused on intergenerational trauma. And I shouldn't say just intergenerational trauma. That's a big
Right.
thing. It's a potent methodology for healing intergenerational trauma. And also, then later, people discovered that it could be applied to organizational dynamics and organizational challenges for when we're like, what is going on here? There's so much, the number one word that my clients use when they come to me of what to express what they want is clarity. People want clarity, like what is going on? And it can be a very potent methodology for shining light on what are the hidden dynamics, what's going on that's giving rise to this really confusing conflict. So I've studied both family constellations and organizational constellations, and I refer to them as systemic constellations because it can apply to any system in that we are that any system that our stuckness is arising from.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to share more. There's like
Yeah, I do. I want to hear more. I'd love to hear like how that plays out in teams or organizations or like just how you work with clients on that kind of uncovering what is going on.
Yeah. So one of the basic ways that systemic constellations works is through three-dimensionalizing a challenge. Because when we are struggling with something in our minds, it's more implicit, it's harder to see. It's like we know it's there, but we can't see it. And so it's a way of taking it outside of our brains so that we can look at what's going on and therefore have insights that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So three-dimensionalizing could be in a workshop space where there's multiple people and people might represent parts of a system. I often use blocks with clients on Zoom, and I'm like, choose a block to represent your boss, choose a block to represent you, choose a block to represent the person you're supervising, right? For example, or to represent the board, or to represent this team and that team, and through putting things, or it might be in someone's mind's eye, it might be in the imagination, but being able to see it in the imagination, or on a computer screen, or with pieces of paper on the floor. And by externalizing dynamics, we can see them more effectively. And then often there's something that hasn't yet been acknowledged. That's really the core of any good conflict transformation work. The heart of it is that something has not been acknowledged. And so by looking at what we do know is there, it can often help us to uncover or reveal or realize something that hasn't yet been acknowledged.
Mm.
How does that land?
Yeah, it does. People have different styles in conflict, but a lot of times conflict is ignored or not acknowledged, and then it festers more. So it sounds like you're providing a way for people to actually look at it, acknowledge it, and then understand what is happening to.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really good point. So just for starters, just shifting from avoiding the tensions that are there to acknowledging the fact that there is some tension or friction or disagreement or misalignment or conflict or however we name it. There's that feeling. Just that shift, acknowledging that there's a problem is huge,
Hmm.
right? And often with clients, I'll need to look at, okay, what are the unconscious contracts or what are the parts of themselves or the trauma patterns or what made them avoid it in the first place. Just working on that
Hmm.
can transform so much, right? And then when we do shift to acknowledging that there's a conflict here and we're looking at, okay, what is going on? The most healing movement in transforming conflict is to acknowledge some dynamic. So
Hmm.
that can be above the surface. Like this person has this story about what's going on, and this person is aware of this data, right? This person knows that these things happen, and this person knows that these things happen. Getting them to talk and be like, oh, we have different versions of reality above the surface is the things that actually happened that we could videotape. So much can be transformed just by acknowledging what happened, right?
Hmm.
And then sometimes we still feel confused. And this is where systemic constellations can be really helpful, is sometimes there are systemic or historical patterns of something that happened in the past. And organizations have trauma too. What happened in the past that it's like that we don't talk about? It's like there's a history book and the page has been ripped out of the history book and we don't talk about it. And it's a healing movement just to say this happened and to bring that page back into the book, right? There's
Hmm.
historical dynamics that are underneath the surface, and that is one place that systemic constellations can be really helpful. Or
Hmm.
in acknowledging loyalties. That often, if there's a conflict, different people are, the executive director is loyal to the budget, like the money, and is like terrified that funding is not going to be there. And a staff member might be fighting for employee benefits and right, employee well-being. And what are the different loyalties that are there? And then there's so many other things below the surface. But that's
Hmm.
where constellations can be really helpful on shining light on what those patterns or loyalties or
Hmm.
dynamics are.
Yeah. And then once the folks that you work with are aware of what's going on, what are some next steps that they typically might take?
Yeah. Yeah. Often it's, talking about it and figuring out, okay, what are uh, what one question is what power do I have here? Right? What power do I have within this situation and this context? A
Mhm.
lot of my clients are middle managers, and that's a particularly challenging position to be in because you don't have ultimate decision-making power. And so sometimes I'll put on my like community organizing hat of like how do you organize, but also how do you realize when you don't have the power to change that situation? You don't want to parentify yourself and go like there's other dynamics I don't want to get too complicated with, but what is the power? What is your role? What is your responsibility? Is looking at that is very important. And then from that place, what with who and about what and communicating and really learning to communicate it as effectively as you possibly can.
Mhm.
And then there's often more organizational design components. I'm not an organizational consultant, but I can often support clients to work to make those changes around role clarity or boundaries or task definition. Again, clarifying power dynamics um,
Mhm.
that need to happen, the conflicts are not just about you and me. It's about how is this organization structured? So
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that you name power too. Of course you would, right? We can't
very
help but see it
important.
and understand it. But that's one of the things sometimes I get frustrated with in some of the kind of tools that I use, maybe around effective communication or whatnot. It takes out the power and the choices people like you can effectively communicate, but do you want to? Is that person going to be open to receiving it? What kind of authority do they have over you? Or just even
Right,
the recognition of like what is in your sphere of control and what's not. And
right.
it doesn't mean to shy away from it, but it does mean to make conscious choices and that like that is a reality that you're living in.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like any of these methodologies that I source from, I love them all. I love constellations very much. And I've needed to consciously decolonize them or bring
Hmm.
in this a lens of power because I mean we're working that is the it's like the water. Or I just published a podcast with Isabel Moses from Bravo Leaders today, and she said that a lot of their work is around naming power, and she said that naming power is like throwing flour on the ghost. It's like the ghost is there, but we need to be able to see it in order to be able to engage with it effectively.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
I love that metaphor.
Me
That's awesome.
too. Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to share about systemic constellations or your work in general? I have some other questions for you, but yeah.
Um, Nothing that occurs to me immediately
Okay.
right now. Yeah.
Well, feel free to be like, oh yeah, I want to share that.
Sure.
But also you mentioned your podcast, and that is how I found you initially. And I'm curious, like what inspired you to start the podcast? How's it going?
Thank you for asking about the podcast. So, my podcast is called Conflict Decoded, and I decided to start it after I'm on city council in my town in Western Massachusetts. And we passed a ceasefire resolution against funding the genocide in Gaza in February, I believe it was, of 2024. And I got so much backlash from fellow counselors who I had met while organizing for the Safe City Ordinance 4 years ago, 4 years before that. I expected them to be allies. I was completely astounded that they weren't supportive, but I was more astounded about how they responded to me. Um, we passed it. We got the votes. We passed it. We got the headline that we needed. And it was a pretty split council. And in the meeting after that, I brought forward a small change to make public comment required at all subcommittee meetings. And people who I knew who had told me prior to the passing of the resolution, I knew that they supported this thing, but used it they were very, very upset. They got very, very angry in the meeting in a way that felt disproportionate to what was actually happening. And I knew that some of them are going through really hard moments in their lives, and I didn't take it personally. But I came out of that experience being like, what people, like, what the fuck, people, like, what, this makes no sense. What is going on? And so I was like, what do I want? And I had so many different tools to support me that actually I was like, wow, I'm pretty emotionally grounded in this and had to like shake it off and cry a little bit after the meeting and like move the energy through my body. But I was like, this is fascinating. Like, what is going on here? And so I was already, really focused on conflict with my clients. It comes up, all the time with my clients, but the title of the podcast, Conflict Decoded, was like, this is what I want. I want to decode conflict. Like, what's going on below the surface? I'd already been podcasting with the name Radical Discernment, which is how I refer to a lot of my work, like the clarity work is. But I shifted the name and the focus at that
Mm.
point. And it's like it's my favorite podcast because I get to talk to the people. Maybe you have the same experience, but I get to talk to people who fascinate me and who I love. And it's like every conversation is a way for me to understand more about like, yeah, decoding conflict. And I feel like that's a um yeah, decoding conflict is really how is also how I'm starting to think about my work and how I weave together all the different threads. Yeah.
Well, it's much needed, and I do love the conversations that you have on the podcast. So,
Thank
that's
you.
really cool, and it's something that I've found too. It's you get a lot out of the podcast experience, and hope that others do as well.
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh, that's really cool. Good. So, um, with the work on city council, what inspired you to serve on city council?
It's really interesting to think about because the person who first reached out to me, uh, who was the council president, was the same person who flipped out at me later, which is it's fascinating how different people can interact in different ways. Um, I had, worked on many electoral campaigns since I was a teenager for many, many years, and I always saw my role as getting other people elected, uh, primarily folks of color or folks from more marginalized backgrounds. And I had never planned to be on city council, but I got a text one day saying that the person who was my precinct councilor was resigning and would I put my name in because I had already been organizing a lot in different ways in my town. And initially, I was like, no. And I tried to ask everybody else to do it, um, but couldn't find anyone else. And it was during a moment where our chief of police was found guilty of racial discrimination. And the entire council voted in some way to cut the police budget in an effort to hold the current mayor and police chief accountable. The only person who didn't vote to cut the budget in some way was the person who had held my seat. And so I was very aware that me joining would dramatically shift the dynamics of the council, the power dynamics of the council to the left. And
Mm-hmm.
the alternative was a very pro police attorney. And for my precinct, most of my constituents are I don't know what the average age is, but probably 60 single homeowners. I am still a tenant. I live next to a community farm in a house that we aim to someday own collectively with shared family. But I'm diversity for my precinct. My family is diversity for this precinct. And so I said for a long time, I was like, no, I don't want to do it. But it was a real gate. It was a real moment of letting go, sacrificing quite a bit. We get $2,000 a year. It's a glorified volunteer position.
Yes.
Um, and letting go of a lot and sacrificing a lot in order to, live into my values, which is, with privilege comes responsibility. And I have significant privilege and I in different ways. And I just felt like, okay, all right, this is the time. So I joined and I've been there almost 4 years now.
Wow, that's cool. You're very thoughtful in your approach and leadership, and I'm wondering what are kind of the core things that you want to do in the city that you live in and where you represent folks too.
Yeah, it's a fun question because when I joined, I was probably the most progressive member of the council. And I wouldn't say that I'm less progressive than anyone else right now, but we have over the last 4 years well, really over the past 10 years, but especially over the last 4 years, dramatically transformed the council. So now we have quite a progressive, young, queer, like activist council. And so now we are positioned to be passing many new laws that we weren't able to when I joined, given who was on the council. And so now I feel like my primary motivating force is a commitment to setting precedent. And I know we had talked about this when I interviewed you, but I really through different organizing, I have learned that, when one community can do something, it makes it far easier for another community to do that same thing. And because we are such a relatively progressive council in 2026, I believe that we have a real responsibility to set precedent with the ordinances or the local laws that we're passing. So we have many that are coming up. We just convinced the mayor to take down some flock cameras, which was a small victory, and a pretty quick victory, actually. But we're working on putting forward a surveillance ordinance. We're putting like a comprehensive ordinance around surveillance. I'm creating with colleagues a gender protection ordinance, which from what I've seen, I haven't been able to find a more thorough ordinance in Massachusetts or in the like elsewhere in the country. I haven't found it. I've looked for it. I'm sure somebody has written something similar, but we're going to be updating perhaps, hopefully, the Safe City ordinance. We're working on a rental registry ordinance, an electric vehicle first ordinance. I chair the appointments and ordinances committee, subcommittee of the council. So my aim in the next 6 months is that we will be passing all of the, who knows what happens, but I think that we have the votes and the community support to pass many
Hmm.
different precedent setting ordinances that will do what is within our power as a town in 2026 to protect our residents and also to make it easier for other communities to do the same thing.
Hmm. That's so important. There's the precedent setting and also the um kind of like on the legal or to give like a framework for it. And then also, I just think for folks organizing in other places, it's so helpful to see that this has been done
Yeah.
elsewhere and to really, I think I use the word inspire a lot, but I think it does
Yeah.
inspire other people too and kind of give them fuel.
That's my
Hmm.
hope. It's
Hmm.
both of those things. I think you did a good job naming them. The both like what is the language? Like how do we put this into legal language? And then two, like, yeah, it is possible. We can do this. Our city
Hmm.
council, we lost the safe city. We lost a fight to pass the safe city ordinance in 2017. We tried to pass it right after Trump was elected the first time, and we lost. and we
Mm.
created a elected progressive Greenfield Facebook group and a whole slew of and also people organized, old Bernie folks organized the continuing the political revolution, and people organized to bring in and shift the dynamics of the city council, which allowed us to pass the Safe City Ordinance in 2019, making it so that no municipal employee can ask people their documented status. And we've
Mhm.
continued to transform the city council really since then. So it's been like 9 years of exciting change. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a critical piece is that people can actually change, these decisions don't come out of nowhere. They
Right.
come from the structure, from the people who represent us, and all those things were created. They can be changed.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're lucky where we live. I mean, it's a uniquely progressive-ish, but it hasn't always been progressive-ish rural area in the United States. It's a unique place. And also like, we created when I was in Phoenix back like 10 years ago. The dynamics are really hard there, and we won some fights.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so change is possible.
It is. Well, you talk about kind of this moment in 2026. What does leadership mean to you right now in this moment?
Mm. Do you mind if I just pause for a second?
I
Because
don't
I
mind.
was reflecting on that question. It's a great question. And
Yeah, no, I don't mind.
yeah, um,
And there's a lot of ways you could go with
yeah, I
it.
love it. It's such a great question. Um, yeah, I love this question so much and was reflecting on it a bit before we met. And there's a few different things. One just very quick thing is I did a group relations conference a couple of years ago. I could go into what that work is, but a key thing from that, Evangeline Sarda was the head of this conference, and she said, leadership is consenting to being projected upon. That's one thing.
Mm,
It's like,
no kidding.
right? Right? It's like, okay, yeah, I will receive projections and I can hold myself whole and be in relationship in the midst of that. So, so
Wow,
that's
and that's not easy.
no, it's not easy. And we can learn to do it. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Another is I think being really mindful of the node in the system that we are called to play, right? Like movements, we have the United States white supremacist, patriarchal, imperialist, all these systems rooted in supremacy put an individual at the top of a pyramid, right? And therefore, from that perspective, we think of movements as led by individuals, right? And individual stories can be really inspiring and powerful. And individuals are super important. And also, movements require all of us and require none of require right we are all I think what's um I'm forgetting who said this, but it's something like we are all like simultaneously indispensable and disposable. Like we are both I'm looking for this Vanessa Machado Oliveira, who wrote Hospicing Modernity, wrote this book.
Mm.
But it's
We can
like
look it up if you want.
we think of movements being led by one person, but in reality, our movements require all of us. And and also strong movements allow us also to come in and out of them, right? And if you think of movements, we don't need, for example, we have 13 city councilors. In my opinion, it's too many in a town of 17.5 thousand people. Not everyone needs to be a city councilor. Like very few people can be. Like that would just be chaos if everybody was a city councilor. But everyone has the ability to show up where they are, whether that's, traditionally churches and schools and workplaces are places of power and towns and etc. So leadership is being aware of the node within the system you are called to play and doing that to the best of your ability. And I do think it's helpful to think of the nodes as I think it's also helpful to think of pillars of power. So this is a framework that um, this is a framework that Jeevan Mansky shared on a podcast that I did with him. That in terms of like fascism is held up, authoritarianism and authoritarian leaders are held by up by certain pillars of power. So like business or media or the military and police, right? And when we can organize to kind of whittle away at those pillars of power, they can start to crumble and we can start to build new systems of power. And so if you are within a school or if you're within a you have a union or you are in a church or wherever you are to get really curious about okay, what are the power dynamics here and what how might we build more power toward change? And building power really is about building community and relationships and etc.
Mhm.
um, and to ask the questions of like not just who could I be as a leader of at the top of that pyramid, but thinking of movements as systems with multiple nodes, who is already working for change and what issues are important here because all issues are interrelated, whether that's housing or immigration or healthcare or education or gender rights or etc. So what are the issues that people are passionate about where you are, who's doing what, how do you be in relationship with them, and how do you show up as the most whole and effective version of yourself? I think there's so much more that I could say about leadership, but
Mhm.
that's what's
Yeah, that's really important. It's like I define leadership really broadly as well in terms of the way that I am at home with my daughter, with my partner, that's a form of leadership. The way that I navigate, working in organizations or just kind of looking at it's like looking at your sphere of influence too. That's one. And then also, I really appreciate what you say about just the interconnectedness of issues. I think it's really easy too for us to be overwhelmed with the state of the world, with all of the issues, feeling like you can't make a change. And it's like, what are you pulled to? And knowing that if you pull on that thread a little bit, that impacts things over here too. And
right,
you can make a difference. You don't have to be, like you said, at the top of the pyramid, the leader. And I think that is structurally unsound,
right,
just in
right.
general when we put people up there. But also, there's just so many ways to lead and make change and be involved.
Yeah. And if you think about the fact that almost any inequity or social problem that we encounter now has its roots in white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist imperialism, as Bell Hooks named it. If those are the roots of, housing and immigration and war and genocide and racism and etc. I could keep going on more fingers than I have. All of the issues that we face are rooted in separation and supremacy culture. And
Mm,
so if we approach our work from that lens, that'll also show up differently, and, not just putting on band-aids, but we show up through a more transformative lens will be more effective. And also, given that each of these things stems from the same place, when we hold care here, it can reverberate through those same roots over here. And if we're working on housing, for example, we can see how issues of class and race and gender, for single moms or etc., show up in they're all interrelated. So yes, like when you said you pull on one, you can serve the whole. Yeah.
hmm Absolutely. So, we talked about the collective work and community work you do, and also that kind of just going back to the beginning of talking about that collective care and individual care. I'm curious, what are the things that kind of fill you up, bring you joy? Yeah.
Yeah. Lunch in at the beginning of every or around at the end of every year, I do my own discernment practice, the practice that I guide my clients through at the beginning of our work together. And at the end of 2024, I did that practice and I formed for myself the commitment statement, Catherine fucking dances in 2025. And I've been fucking dancing since 2025. I was just at I was going to go for 3 days, but my son sprained his ankle, and so I came home early. But a Kizomba weekender, uh, I've fallen in love with Kizomba, urban kiz dancing.
Okay.
But occasionally I'll go contra dancing. There's really good contra dancing in my community. I go to the salsa, bachata, kizomba, etc. night every Thursday evening. So dancing has been bringing me a lot of joy. And then simultaneously, as I go out to like 1 a.m. a couple nights a week, or at least once a week, I also tending to my sleep. The other side of that polarity has been really key. I got really bad insomnia like a year and a half ago. I think it was largely hormonal, but also to do with like all the political stuff. And so really sleeping well and prioritizing that, I've slowed down in many ways as a result of tending to my sleep and yeah, friendship and journaling. I really rely on my journal. It's like my therapist and relying on my journal and yeah, a lot of
Hmm.
I could keep going, but those are the core dancing, sleep, my journal, etc. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that's great to hear. I love to dance too, but more like just whenever I need to get some movement going.
Great. That's
Uh-huh.
fantastic.
Good. Well, it's been so good talking with you today. How can folks connect with you?
Yeah, my website is callingsencourage.com, so folks can learn about my different coaching options there and find my podcast there. And also they can sign up for my biweekly love letters to change makers. So every 2 weeks-ish, sometimes more frequently than that, I send out an email with often with my latest podcast, but sometimes with other just like morsels of care and support for people's work and lives in this time. And then I also spend a bunch of time on LinkedIn, so folks can find me there as well. And Conflict Decoded is on all the different podcast platforms, so people will find that wherever they listen to podcasts.
Yes, they will, and I'll make sure to link everything in the show
Thank you.
notes too.
Thank
Yes,
you.
well, thank you so much for our conversation. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Thank you too.
Wow. Well, I hope that you appreciated the conversation as much as I did, dear listener. I would love to hear what stood out to you, what resonated. Of course, there will be a link to SpeakPipe in the show notes where you can record a message and share your thoughts, or you can get in touch a number of ways that are listed in the show notes as well. And I'd love to know what stood out to you from the conversation. What are other topics that you'd like me to cover in future episodes or folks that you'd like me to talk with? And if you want to hear more of the Resourced and Resourceful Leadership podcast, please follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. To support the show, please leave a 5-star review and share it with a few people who you think would appreciate it. Thanks again and take good care.